Well, welcome again, everyone. It's so good to have you back for the second session on Megillat Esther. Obviously, we're short in time. It's hard to believe that we'll be able to cover everything we want to speak today, but we'll try. I would like to start with a Tehillim, with a Psalm 22. According to the Talmud, Psalm 22 attribute to Esther HaMalkah, to Esther the queen and Mordechai. Based on our previous session, we learned the tragedy involved with Esther's life. We learned the sad story of orphan from very young age of Esther, losing her both father and mother at the very early stage of her life, having Mordechai somehow either adopted her as an uncle or, as we learn from the Talmud, married her. Then we dealt with the issue of being married to Mordechai while being married to Achashverosh and all the conflicts between the two ideas based on the Talmud and other sources we discussed in the previous session. And we brought later on a responsa that dealing with those questions. Those who are not here in the previous session, say on the internet so you can watch it. Anyway, we left open the question of chaos of Purim. It's a sad story that have a happy ending, almost like American movies, right? You notice the difference between Russian movie and American movies. One of them is that American movies usually is a happy ending. Never mind if it's true or not. They want people to walk out and hopefully come back again to watch another movie. But the story of Esther, unlike the way we learn in our kindergarten or in the preschool, it's a reality of life. It's a painful tragedy that happens to a woman who kept herself silent, at least for the first 4 chapters, then living with a tragedy life between either 2 husbands or crisis of her people, and become proactive by getting to the really wicked king Achashverosh and try to change the Haman's decree. And then when her people were saved, she ends up living there with Achashverosh, having children there and more. So in the past, when it's come to Purim, we are always worried about what? About our costumes, right? To make sure that we look nice. Several years ago I was a Batman, then I was a Superman, then I was a marshmallow, whatever it is. And that was our main concern. When we're getting a little wiser, I think, and older, we are thinking a little differently than the way that the kindergarten teacher used to teach us. And with the belief that the Tanakh, the Holy Bible, the text, the canon, is true, with that traditional Judaism belief that it's really divine text, then we have a lot of mind-boggling, serious questions. We present some of them last week. So the point of departure today is the chapter 22 in the book of Psalms. So you know, book of Psalms, Tehillim, contain 150 psalms. Psalm 22 begins with statement Lam Natseach, for the conductor, Al Ayelet HaShachar. Ayelet HaShachar, the rabbis tells us in the Talmud and other midrashic sources, it's applied to Esther, Mizmor LeDavid. Now the problem is, if you tell me that that's only Esther and it's a description, the Talmud said, how Esther was about to see Achashverosh and she was in a room full of idols and she said, Almighty, Almighty, Eli, Eli, Lama Azavtani, why did you forsake me? Which the Jewish people throughout generation use this painful word of Psalm 22 and feel like an attribute to that time of crisis when Esther was forced to be there in a palace, was forced to go to speak to the king. While waiting for the king, she was standing there in a room full of idols, and then she asked God, Almighty, where are you? That's a beautiful idea and beautiful midrashic rabbinic interpretation. And we respect that very deeply. But as we said, as a mature adult, we examine the words, and the psalm itself said, Mizmor LeDavid, a psalm by David. And we all know that David lives much earlier than Esther. So what does that mean, Ayelet HaShachar? So simply speaking, Ayelet HaShachar is early in the morning, before the dawn, when it's still dark, when you still do not see it. Eli is an attribute of a judgment. Almighty God change your judgment to compassion. So again, it's a beautiful, you can say, word of prophecy that King David thought about Esther. But as we learned last week, there is much to that. You remember last week we discussed Yael in the book of Judges, and we said that she was proactive. It wasn't a regular case of a rape, but she was active in order to change. It's from her status as Karka Olam, we learned last week. Esther has the choice to, the same as Yael, to change Avo el HaMelech asher lo kadat, which means that both of them, in a way, turn to be proactive. They are not a typical case of rape. Yael did it in order to change Sisra, cut off his head, and make the Jewish people the nation of the winner of the war, and the book of Judges. And Esther, now by serious attempt of Mordechai and pushing hard, and 3 days of the entire Jewish community of fasting for 3 days, then, and only then, she became proactive. And now, in a way, in our modern day language, she proactively seduced the king to change his decree in favor of the Jewish people. Unlike the story of Pilegesh Bagiva, which you mentioned a little bit last time, it was against her will. You take this, the end of Book of Judges, a cruelty, and throw that woman to all these animals, to all these horrible people, and she was totally raped, right? Here is a case of changing the decision, become proactive. And we ask those questions when it's come to responsa, and we brought several responsa last week. But before we go further, I would like to turn you to adulthood and go to reality show. And you know, in a reality show, we talk real business. And real business meaning we're no longer in a kindergarten, we're no longer in the preschool or Hebrew school or elementary school. This group are mature adult. As a mature adult, if we turn to page 8 and we start the story of the Megillah, we're going to study the Megillah a little different. So yes, we believe that the truth of the Tanakh, the truth of the Torah, and we believe that it's a divine message and more, but as a mature adult, we know rules that said, Shiv'im panim la Torah. There are many different avenues to understand the Torah, and as long as the person who delivered that is a halachic person, is someone who followed the Torah and Jewish tradition, we can see much deeper. So now, modern days, we have a new rabbi. And the internet, the rabbi's name, either Rabbi Google or Rabbi Wikipedia. Right? And those important rabbis, if you take the time and you search, and you have it in the office for those who wants to see it already printed, you see it in the printer if you want to bring it. But anyway, who was Achashverosh? So we learn in a kindergarten, who was the Achashverosh. We learn that it was either a moron, drunk king, right? Or a wicked king, or some said smart king, all kind of based on the Talmud, tractate Megillah, that speaks about King Achashverosh as a king of the Jewish people, and king of the world, but put a decree against the Jewish people. And he was the king that controlled 127 provinces, so 127 countries. Now, if we take the switch and we go to Wikipedia and see who is Achashverosh, so Achashverosh was a king called Xerxes. Xerxes. Who is Xerxes? Is a Greek king that lived at that time, which means he lived between 485 to 465 before the Common Era. This carried tremendous meaning for us. Why it's so important? Thank you. Why it's so important? It's because this, thank you, brings a total different understanding of a story. I'm reading from Wikipedia. Xerxes says the old Persian ruling over heroes. His entire life is 519, 465 BC. Called Xerxes the Greek, was the fourth king of kings at that dynasty of Persia, and is a whole story of what transpired this time. So I'm going to give you just the vignette, the abbreviation. You're welcome to read more of his unbelievable life. But the idea is, it's not a moron, drunk king the way that we learn in our kindergarten. We're going to see by Wikipedia and other historical sources a total different story of what transpired, and soon you see why it's affecting us, the Jewish people nowadays, 21st century. I would like to start with the story of Cyrus. We know the story of Cyrus was a great king living in Babylon, and he made this famous declaration, Cyrus' declaration, that affected all of us. In short, his declaration saying that the Hebrews, the Jewish people, as a pardon, and they delivered them, they have the right to return to the lands, they have the right to build their independent temple, and according to Wikipedia, they followed 23 sources in the Jewish Bible over the story of Cyrus, and it said, according to the Bible, Cyrus the Great, I'm reading from Wikipedia, king of Persia, was the monarch under whom the Babylonian captivity ended. In the first years of his reign, he was promoted by God to decree that the temple in Jerusalem should be rebuilt, and that such Jewish people as cared to might return to the land for this purpose. Moreover, he showed his interest in the project by sending back with them the sacred vessels which had been taken from the first temple, and a considerable sum of money with which to buy building materials. Now, with that said, Cyrus in Babylon and the Jewish connection, so he was, according to Wikipedia, I'm just reading word by word, Cyrus the Great is unconditionally praised in the Jewish sources. It is likely that after the Persian conquest of Babylon, Cyrus had commended his relationship with the Jewish leaders in exile, and that he later was considered as anointed by God. The Hebrew Bible states that Cyrus issued the decree of liberation to the Jewish people. Cyrus' edict for the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem marked a great epoch in the history of the Jewish people. And they bring all the sources. Now, Cyrus' declaration occurred 539 before the Common Era. We go to the story of Achashverosh, and we check it carefully in this beautiful scroll of Esther. It occurs, if you just match the year and make the calculation, it was 60 years after Cyrus' declaration. And here is $1 million question. With that historical evidence, we need to ask ourselves, if that's the case, and Cyrus gave the permission to Jewish people to go and build the temple, why the Jewish people did not made Aliyah and went to Israel and built the second temple. What we said at the very beginning, we said, the beginning of the Megillah, we said, the only reference to Eretz Israel, we said, Asher Hogleta Me Nebuchadnezzar Melech Babel. So that's page 17. They said it was a Jewish man, first time formally using someone from the tribe of Judah in the Tanakh as Yehudi, in the capital city of Shushan. Name was Mordechai, all his yichus, his lineage. And they said he had made to leave Jerusalem together with the Jewish people who left with King Yechoniah. So this one, if you count the year, that was 597 before the count, before the years that they count, right? It's coming here. Now, if you calculate the year, Mordechai was not part of those people who exiled with Yechoniah, because if you tell me he was one of them, and you count the years, he has to be 120 years old. It can be. So again, we go back to Rabbi Wikipedia. And we search with Wikipedia and other sources what exactly happened. And the more you dig, the more you see. How many of you watched the movie The 300 or read the book 300? It's unbelievable. What? Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I highly recommend those who didn't have a chance to watch it or read the book. It's called 300. And in that movie or that book, it's a description of unbelievable war between Greek and Persia. Terrible death. This is one of the bloody war at that time ever. Hundreds of thousands Persians died, and it was 3 elite units, 3 Spartanians. It's a elite unit that came from the vanguard, from the head of the Greeks, and they stopped the Persian army, and to the last one of them, they died and not gave up anything to the Persian. So with that understanding, we have here the Persian emperor, and we have this story in Wikipedia, which you're welcome to read, about Capresser, which was the emperor, and he has few generals in his army. One of the general, his name is Morduk. Now, who is Morduk? So now you juxtapose between Wikipedia and the Talmud in Tractate Megillah, special tractate dedicated to the Megillat Esther, mainly to Megillat Esther, right? And the Talmud in Megillah said that Mordechai, prior to whole ganze Megillah of Esther, he was one of the generals in Achashverosh's army. So now what we understand so far, it was a Persian king, and that Persian king, he called upon all the other generals, kings of different nations. This was 482 before the Common Era. And now at the beginning of the Megillah, in the chapter 1, they said on verse 3, page 8, they said, Bishnat Shalosh Lemolcho. It was a 3rd year of his ruling, of his king, which is matched with our counting of the year, which is 483. And that time, what is that time? If you match the two sources, bear with me, that was the time of Eve before the huge war that took place. That was the proper time. Now, let's understand what transpired here. They said in the third year of his rule, we call it correctly, Xerxes, or in the Megillah Achashverosh, right? He made a very big party or celebrations. To whom? To all of his officers and servants. And what's the purpose? They said in verse 4, when he showed, what did he show? All his treasure and all of the beauty. The rabbi said it was taken from the temple, whatever it is. Now I ask you a very basic strategic question. Anyone who learned a little bit the strategic plan of any war throughout world history. Let's go close to our days. Many of you experienced the crisis of 9/11. Remember it vividly. I was living in New Jersey at that time. It's like yesterday. And I remember the President of the United States declare war and send the forces to Iraq, which many of us regret. But at that time, it took United States a long time to put together many other nations, from England to Australians to any other nations, to create a coalition and goes together against Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. Now, if you count the days in time post 9/11, approximately a half a year it took United States President and all the other countries to get together and formulate coalition and go there. Now, if you trace back world history, from the early Bible, King Solomon and Queen Sheba, or you read the story of Chizkiah, the king, or the Merodach, the king of Babylon, and many others, and you put the mechanism throughout generation from about 5,000 years ago to our days, it's one mechanism, always the same thing. When you get together, many nations get together, and one king who's leading it show off all of his belonging, all of his wealth, has one single goal. And the goal is simply to get together and declare a war against specific country. So here, the king Xerxes, Achashverosh in the Megillah, get together the 127 provinces and countries, and this is a very serious plan. They get together and planning a heavy-duty war that took them, the plan, how long? 180 days. If you read the story in Wikipedia, and you read the terrible battle of Marathon, to this very day, we have running long runs. It's called marathon, right? People who run long distance. It's based on this story. The story of the war between Xerxes and all these other nations that get together against the Greeks, or you can go vice versa, depending how you look, but it was Persian against Greeks, and that bloody war took place approximately, soon you see, 4 years. So what happened by the end of the 180 days? Again, the same as United States have a half a year of get together, all the coalition. Here in ancient times, when there are completion of 180 days of getting together, all the high generals, high officers, getting together and try to figure it out what to do and how to do and how to declare war, then on page 10, verse 5, the Megillah tells us when the getting together for 180 days was done, and if you look carefully, the Hebrew word ubimloot hayamim ha'ele, meaning at the end of that days that they get for counsel and figure out how to do the war, the king made a special, how long? 7 days. 7 days parties. To whom? To the high officers, to people who are dwelling in the capital of Shushan. Meaning, after a long time, after half a year of work, now the headquarters get together for a special gathering before the war of 7 days, right? And then they have 7 days of celebrations. Who are the people who invited to that celebration? Who are the people who partake? All the generals, the headquarters, the people who live in Shushan. Now, if you switch that to the story we learned by our preschool, Hebrew school, kindergarten, that King Ahasuerus get rid of his wife Vashti, and he's now so sad that he lost his wife Vashti, so he's looking for another wife. And you take it much seriously and you count the years. Now you go to chapter 2 on page 16, and the chapter speaks about, if you look at the time frame, so they said here, I want to find the exact verse. Oh, they said on verse 16, Bishnat Sheva lemalchuto. All this story of switching to Esther, to a newly wife, that was 7 years of his kingdom. So let's understand. Let's try to put together chapter 2 and chapter 1. Chapter 2, we said, it happens when the king has his 7 years. Chapter 1 said that it was in the king of, how long he was there? The 3rd year. So what we understand, that is a distance, listen carefully, is a distance of how long? 4 years between chapter 1 and chapter 2. What transpired of those 4 years between chapter 1 and chapter 2? Now we're taking away all the fun stuff in our childhood when we sat with the kindergarten teacher and she told us a story of Vashti and all these beautiful children's story, and we tried to put together the historical evidence and what exactly transpired. It was about 3.5 years of horrible, bloody war. Read Rabbi Wikipedia and take your time and read carefully the incidences, and you see what exactly happened. Unfortunately, the king returned with a huge loss. As we said earlier, it was a bloody war, and he returned and he lost. And when he lost his big dream to be the most controlling king of the world, and now he's back to his palace, to his place, with all these small things involved with the king palace, now he needs to appoint it in his relatively small kingdom ruling. He have 2 generals, 2 important generals that took off their army uniforms, and now they are about to be ministers in his palace. One was named is Salamis, and the other one was named, it's a big question if it's Morduk or what exactly the name. Some said one is named Mukhan, some said was name is Haman, the other one's Morduk. But what it's clear, that one very big general was name is Haman, and one big general was name is Morduk. Now the 2 taking off the army uniforms, And they have these political debates over controlling the governments, of taking over relatively small government of Persia. And the problem is that on chapter 3, you read how the king now appointed the former general, whose name is Haman. He, page 24, he appointed him Gidal HaMelech, the king of Achashverosh, upraise Haman, and everyone bowed down to him, and Mordechai did not kneel, not bow to Haman. So, based on the Talmud, our kindergarten teacher used to say that the reason Mordechai did not bow to Haman, it's either because you have a tzelem, you have an idol, or there's a Jewish pride, that we have our national pride and we are not bowed down to others. That's based on the Talmud. And there's nothing wrong with that interpretations. But since we know that there are more than one interpretation, and again, it's based on the spirit that we believe that this is some type of divine text, that it's a serious text that dealing with reality, and we believe that the truth of the Tanakh. So now we need to match it with Wikipedia. So we understand it was a bloody war in the two locations. One was a place called Tranpolai, and the other one is a place called Salamis. And the bloody war ends up with a great loss. But during that war was a general that lost tremendously in his area, whose name is either Memuchan or later on Haman, and he went to Morduk and he asked him for help. And they signed an agreement that Morduk forces will help Memuchan forces in exchange for Memuchan, Haman, to be the second in command. The first in command was Morduk, the second in command is Memuchan, Haman. Now, let's match it with the Talmud. The Talmud said in Tractate Megillah, page 10, that Haman, during the war, he gave up hope. It was a bloody war and a tremendous loss of soldiers. And he ran to Morduk and he asked him for help. And Morduk asked him to sign an agreement. The agreement is that you abide by my rulings. I'm just reading the words of the Talmud. They said, Avda de nimkar betalmoi, ze ba bepros bulei, veze ba bepros kotei. Which means that the agreement between Morduk and Haman was that Haman will be a second command in exchange of Morduk helping with his forces during the time of withdrawal, not to lose more soldiers. So they have a contract, they have an agreement. Now all of a sudden they have a new settlement when they get back after the bloody war to Shushan. And now all of a sudden the king appointed Haman to be the head. So Mordechai looked at him and he said, wait a second. We are both generals before. We both have a bloody war and I'm the one who saved your lives. Who do you think you are? I will never bow down to you. You are nothing to me because you lose the war and I saved you. And now I can prove my point based on the Talmud and based on Wikipedia.
Interesting.
Verse 4, look carefully what verse 4 on chapter 3 said to us. The servant of the king tell Haman that Mordechai is not bowed down to him. Mordechai, right?
Right.
So now, what did they say? Mordechai told them that he was a Jew.
Not the only.
And verse 6 said, כי הגידו לו את עם מרדכי. What does that mean? The text itself, the literal text, what it tells us. That people told Haman that General Mordech actually is what?
Jewish.
Is a Jew.
And that's why here.
So up to this point, what we understand, that General Mordech hid his Judaism. He was a general in the army, and because of him, Haman was saved, and no one knows anything about him. His mother called him in a Persian name Mordech, and he was a third generation of immigrants that left the Holy Land of Israel, and that's 120 years after the Yechoniah exile. 120 years after the immigration from Israel to Babylon, the level of assimilation was very high. So actually what we learn that the story of the book of Esther is the story of assimilation of Jews. That's the truth. Meaning, now I'm going to tell you a lot of stuff. I'm not sure if you're going to like me, but that's the way it is, okay? If you try to compare in some ways the story of our people about 120 some years ago, after so many millions of Jews ran away from Eastern Europe, and they came to different locations. They went to Australia and South America and the Golden Medina, right? The America. What happened to Jewish people when they came to the United States? One of the first things they did, they're no longer Yosale and Moishale and David. Now he's a George, right? And it's a Paul, and it's all kind of names. And they changed, they assimilated, they somehow enculturated with a new world, a new society. And not everyone saved. You send your kids to public school, they are going to be in a melting pot. They change. You read so many stories of people that said that they're embarrassed with the Yiddish of the grandpa. You speak Yiddish and you're embarrassing me, you embarrass me the way you speak English, right? Or you read a story of German Jews,
Right.
that they, between the World War I and World War II, and how they are embarrassed to be by any means recognized as Jews. There is a book called the German Requiem, written by a fellow Israeli, name is Amos Elon. He described, as many others, how German Jews lived prior to Kristallnacht. Heartbreaking story. The majority of them, excluding the very few Rabbi Hirsch students in Frankfurt, most of the German Jewry were totally assimilated. Following the teaching of many, I don't want to mention names, you know whom I'm referring to, who said, be a Jew at your home and German everywhere else, right? So that's not an invention of Mordechai and Esther. That was a third and fourth generation of immigrants. They went to Babylon and integrated with the melting pot of society. His name is Mordech, and the DNA, the core story of the Megillah, it's a story of Persian Jewry that almost disappeared, that totally assimilated. The Talmud put it nicely, but the implications are clear. The Talmud said in Tractate Megillah, the rabbis asked, how come they received such a severe punishment, the decree to annihilate all the Jews? And they said, because they partake of the party of that wicked people. What does that mean, partake of the party? It's an expression of assimilation in a nice way. So what exactly stopped this story? Hitler, Ymach Shemo, stopped this story with the final solution. Which means when you read in a Megillah how Haman and the king sat together to drink, and you read in the next chapter how Mordechai, all of a sudden, Mordechai, page 32, chapter 4. What happened to Mordechai? Mordechai heard what happened, everything that had happened, and what did he do? He tore his clothing. What does that mean, he tore his clothing? And then he put a sackcloth and ashes. He went out the city and cried out loudly and bitterly. What does that mean? Mordechai wore the general uniform, was a very high respected officer. Then he became one of the ministers. Now all of a sudden he realized that all this is nothing, it's not worth anything. Suddenly he recognized himself. I'm a Jew. Right. I'm a Pintalei. I am not Mordechai, I'm Mordechai. Yeah. It's a reflection, just an example of Dreyfus trial. Everyone familiar with Dreyfus trial? And what happened during Dreyfus trial when Theodore Herzl all of a sudden changed? And he put it in writings. All of a sudden you have this shocking Dreyfus trial that put Theodore Herzl with a new understanding. Unfortunately, the story of the mitzvah of Zachor, on Shabbat, we have two Torah reading. One is a biblical commandment, Zachor, that everyone should remember. Just changing names. Amalek, Haman, like they use a different term of a biting German shepherd, biting dangerous dog, right? Why is that? So you cry to God. So all of a sudden that caused Mordechai to understand even he personally may be saved, and even Esther may be saved, because nobody knows so far that she is Jewish, right? And he may be saved. He was a veteran, right? Yeah. But all of his brothers and sisters going to disappear. All of a sudden, he's biting Amalek, Haman, Agag, different dog, wake up the Pintalei Jew. And what happened in the Megillah, after he get this slap on his face, he woke up. He woke up everybody. He pushed Esther to do teshuvah. She dressed Big Day Malchut. She now, all of a sudden, after 3 days and nights, the Jewish people fast. The only time the Jewish people fast 3 days and 3 nights during Pesach was the 3 days of that fast, 11 months before the big change of Purim. And after 3 days and 3 nights that the entire Jewish world are fasting and worried about their disappearing, all of a sudden, we said at the Megillah at the end that all of a sudden it's a happy ending. So as we said, it's a tragedy that happens nicely. Now I ask you a basic question based on the understanding so far. We have 10 chapters in the book of Esther, and if you go to chapter 10, it's a very short chapter, page 72. And chapter 10 tells us that Achashverosh put taxes, and it's written in the diary, in the book of history of the kings of Media and Persia. And Mordechai, the Jew, is a viceroy king, very similar to Joseph, right? Viceroy king. And Mordechai is great among the Jewish people. Lerov Echav, most of his brethren like him, not everyone likes him. They said good things of his people and bring peace to all his children. Beautiful. Now, those who are involved with creative art, you know that that's not the end of the story. What is the chapter 11 of Book of Esther? What happened the next day? So, the next one is a book in the Bible called the Book of Nehemiah, which means from a story of total assimilation, Al Na'arot Babel, that the Jewish people in Babylonia live with all this wealth and everything and peace, and total forget their Yiddishkeit, the Judaism, Jewish people who thought that, like modern days, that Israel can be everywhere, like if you capture them in Antibes, so you can send Israeli forces to rescue you, right?
Yeah.
So, based on the Tanakh, on the Bible, the next chapter after the book of Esther, straight to Ezra and Nehemiah. And chapter 1 and 2 in the book of Nehemiah, you read about Tikkun Olam. What happened? We have this important statement that the Jewish people can go and do something. And the Jewish people left Shushan, not everyone, but the middle class, low class, went from Shushan to Yerushalayim, and in a way continuation of the book of Esther by making Aliyah and building the second temple. So again, let's put together the pieces. The Cyrus declaration happened before the story of Haman. And now you go to a painful statement from many rabbis, including contemporary rabbis. They claim that if the Jewish people right away after Cyrus let them go and they made Aliyah, they made the whole story of Mordechai and Esther will never happen. Some said it. If you go, and again I give you a little homework, you read Isaiah chapter 9, 700 before the Common Era. You read about the king Sancherib, how he destroyed 46 cities, and you read the Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin, page 94, and you go to all the description in the book of Nehemiah. Basically, the king of Persia allowed the Jewish people to build Yerushalayim, and it was a very important day in the Jewish calendar. It's called Megillat Ta'anit. It's a scroll that have all these happy days. And if you go by the famous Israeli author, her name is Vered Ben Noam. She wrote a book about that historical period, about that time. So she said it was a day, based on the Talmud and other sources, that called Yom Nehemiah, the day the Jewish people dedicate for Nehemiah. You don't hear it now, but at that time was a big day of celebration, which was the Zayin of Adar, the day we call Shushan Purim. That's the day that they built the Chomot Yerushalayim, the wall around Jerusalem. The 13th of Adar was a very special day. We have the 13th of Adar, the Fest of Esther, and by the end of that we read the Megillah. At that time, it was a fellow named Nicanor, which is a gate in Jerusalem. It's called the Gate of Nicanor. He was one of the Greek kings, and he get killed that day, and it was a big day of celebrations. So the point is, what you see, that the whole story of Purim is a fulfillment of a big dream in the Tanakh, that one day the Jewish people will realize who they are and what they are, and they change. So to wrap up our understanding, our study, just again, is much more to discuss, but to put together the Megillah from the serious point of view of traditional Judaism in one hand, hold the sources in the Talmud, but the same way try to take the historical evidence to all the sources. The book of Esther is a painful story of assimilation of the Jewish people, and is a story of crisis that have a happy ending, because the Jewish people get together and realize who they are and what they are, and after 3 days and 3 nights of fasting, things change. But again, we didn't finish yet, maybe in the future, the story, the final story of Esther. It's very painful. And even she was the one who caused the miracle and everything. The question left, how come she stayed with Achashverosh afterward? And the question left, what exactly transpired to her to make that decision to stay? But in very, very short, the true story of Esther is a story of war between Persia and Greek, war that involved with 127 provinces, war that took place between 3.5 to 4 years, war that the king of Persia lost, and Morduk did teshuvah, and he changed to Mordechai, and he cares enough to save the Jewish people, and he asked Hadassah, who was called by Persian name Esther, to use her authority. And because she turned to be a proactive queen, and it wasn't a typical case of rape, because she willingly went ahead and did that, her status by halacha, by Jewish law, changed, and therefore she's now part of the kingdom of Achashverosh, which again, there is a lot of implications. At this time, if you have any questions or anything, you can ask. This is your time.